My name is John Pete, pronounced Pete, but spelled P-I-T-R-E. It's a French pronunciation. I'm from Louisiana. I've never left Louisiana. I was born about 45 minutes south of here. If you look at a map of Louisiana, there's an area, a big triangle outlined that actually says Cajun Heartland. And I'm from the highest point of the Cajun Heartland. And one thing that I knew I loved was the outdoors. I mean, I grew up hunting and fishing. I grew up wanting to be outdoors. We lived in town, and there was a concrete drainage canal running through not far from our house, and every moment I was in that concrete canal. I wanted to know every animal, every plant. My parents would tell me, do not go there, and I would be in there. They would say, okay, you're gonna go, at least come back at a certain time, so they gave me a watch. Well, that didn't do any good. I remember in 8th grade writing a paper. Our teacher said, what do you want to be? Wildlife biologist. I wrote a paper. I didn't even really know what a wildlife biologist did. So graduated from high school, went 2 years to a junior college at LSU at Eunice, not very far from my hometown. So I went to school pursuing that career, knowing there were no jobs in it, but I literally can't do anything else. And so by the time I got those 2 years under my belt at that junior college, transferred to McNeese State in Lake Charles, went 2 more years, graduated with a degree in wildlife management, had several graduate assistantships, teaching zoo labs, doing research at Rockefeller Refuge, working for the National Marine Fisheries Service, doing sea turtle and marine mammal strandings. I did everything I could in the 2 years that it took to get my master's. In the time that I transitioned and got my master's degree, it's in biology and environmental science. There were numerous jobs. I got lucky, and I started working for the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries as an inland fisheries specialist. Did that for a little over a year. Went to DEQ as an environmental specialist. Did that for another year. I had it in my mind that I wanted to work for the Fish and Wildlife Service. Federal government, I knew the benefits were a little better than state government, but Fish and Wildlife, I mean, the name sounded cool. It represented everything I wanted to be with, and I tried. And at the time, the way you got a federal job, you got on the Federal Register, and then they called you when the job opened. Well, this agency, the Soil Conservation Service, called me, and I'm all, who are they? I didn't even know anything about them. There was an opening in Baton Rouge for a wildlife biologist. At the time that the BRO bill, or the Coastal Wetlands Planning Protection Act, had just been passed. This was about 1990, 1991, and Louisiana was getting major funding for doing coastal restoration work. America's wetland was being lost, and so Soil Conservation Service played a big role. They had someone attached to the Louisiana Department of Natural Resources Coastal Restoration Division, and they needed a wildlife biologist on staff. And so I interviewed, I got that position. So I was a federal employee assigned to a state agency doing assessments on these restoration projects. And it was a great job. 3 months later, while looking for a house, I got a call and said, there's a new program called the Wetland Reserve Program coming. We're a pilot state. We need you in Alexandria. So they transferred me to Ellick, and that's where I've been ever since. And I held a area wildlife biologist position for 6 years. Then I became state wildlife biologist, did that for 16, loved that job. Wasn't even a job, really. Like I told Keith, I would do it for free if I didn't have to pay bills. It was not a job to me. I enjoyed, especially meeting private landowners, and I started to realize if you wanna impact natural resources, and again, I was focused on wildlife, you need to do it on private lands. Fish and Wildlife Service, I wanted to do that. I mean, there's a handful of refuges. You really want to make an impact, you need to have some say in what private landowners are doing. So it seemed like I kind of found my niche, and then in '94, the Soil Conservation Service changed its name to the Natural Resources Conservation Service, which really, I felt like they almost did it for me. It was a fit. It was a perfect fit for me. Good experience, and it seems to have gone in a blink of an eye. This year will put me a little over 30 years. And for the last Well, this year I will have been in the state resource conservationist position for 8 years. So it takes me a little over 30 years with the Natural Resources Conservation Service. Literally has gone in a blink of an eye. So if you are looking for a job and you have interest and passion for natural resources, the Natural Resources Conservation Service is something I think you need to consider. And what it has done for me, it has allowed me to have that purposeful career. Again, much more important than finances is having that purposeful life and working with producers who feed, who clothe, and who provide fuel for the entire world. And they do so by also creating wildlife habitat, running water quality through their ownership. They're the largest. If you look at landscape level, they cover more landscape as a single business than any other business. So what they do affects all of us. So definitely check out internships, get you an account on USA Jobs, and go and talk to your local service center, ask them what they do. I'm wearing an Earth Team volunteer shirt. That's open to anyone. You can go and volunteer if you don't have the skills and the credentials. You can get it today by volunteering, and that counts on your on building resume skills. What we're standing in right now is a longleaf pine forest, and all of this area around central Louisiana was historically longleaf. Very poor fertility, very acidic soils, but these pine trees and the understory very well suited on these sites. And actually, unlike a lot of, we're on the western extreme of the longleaf range. It does go into Texas, but if you go eastward, and the historic longleaf pine, that's now some of their best cropland. In Louisiana, it is not for us because it's very erosive, it's very sandy, it's on a lot of slope, but it's very poor in fertility. But in its natural state, it's extremely biodiverse. There's a tremendous amount of plant species because of the open canopy, the light hitting the ground, and you can see here there's a lot of green in the understory. It's not shaded out. So it's a very unique habitat, and it supports a lot of unique, especially bird species. We average about 60 inches of rainfall here, like we're about to get right now. So all that rainfall promotes growth, and it promotes hardwood growth. Hardwoods will take over this site, and the only thing that can knock it back really is, well, the forces that knock it back historically have been fire, natural fires, or fires lit by Native Americans, and then herbivory. We had eastern elk in this area historically. We had American bison come through this area, and certainly white-tailed deer. There's still white-tailed deer here. So those forces of herbivory and fire, they burned through here. They removed competition. They allowed those longleaf pines to thrive, and they allowed the understory to thrive. And so you had a lot of bird species, especially like the red-cockaded woodpecker, that did great in this open canopy forest. But because of the lack of fire and because of the lack of herbivory, it grows up, and that's the reason that species, the red-cockaded woodpecker, was listed on the endangered species list initially, because we were losing habitats like this. So the forces today, what we are trying to promote, is more in line with the historic forces and the natural regime of management, because you could do anything right here. Could you grow cotton? You could, but you're on a slope. You'd have to add a lot of fertility. It would run off. Your yields wouldn't be very high. This is very suited to pine production, specifically longleaf pine production. Could you grow slash or loblolly? Absolutely. There's a ton of it all around us that people are growing. The only downside to that, what we have seen, is that if you try to grow a tremendous amount of loblolly, and we're planting at high rates, you're producing some timber, but you are closing out the understory. So you have a lot of competition among the timber. You have no understory, and so you don't have all the ecological benefits. And the sad thing, especially right now, the timber market can go up and down like any market, and right now it's very difficult to sell timber. So I know of producers, ag producers, who own lands like this, and they are slowly trying to transition back to more of a longleaf rather than a monoculture of loblolly. Not really for ecological purposes, but market-driven purposes. They're growing pole timber, that is the market stays much steadier. They are, at the same time, they are growing a lot of understory because of the thin canopy, a lot of sunlight hitting the ground, and so they are also grazing it. So they're producing wood products, they're producing food products on the same acre, and it's buffering the effects, the economic effects. They are not in a downturn timber market, they rely on their livestock. In a downturn livestock market, they're relying on their timber market to generate income. They have to generate income. The thing that I like about it, though, that mimics the forces that this system was evolved through, that herbivory. Those cows are mimicking what the bison did, they're mimicking what the elk did, if utilized through prescribed grazing. And then all you have to add is prescribed burning, that other force, to complement it. Now we're on public land here. This isn't, herbivory has been taken out, but they still burn it. Unfortunately, with that 60 inches average rainfall, that's 5 feet of rainfall each year on these soils, we're growing a lot of plants. We're growing a lot of, and burning conditions aren't always ideal. They burn at a frequency. This particular place has been burned every year for the last 3 years, but it grows back immediately, and it's not stopping. Fire alone, without herbivory, is not stopping the woody invasion. So even though this is a native plant here, this is a red oak, sweet gum is a native plant here, this will take over, and RCW, red-cockaded woodpecker, and all the other grassland birds that utilize this wouldn't be here. So they are actually contracting to do mechanical clearing on this site, mechanical mulching, to mimic the herbivory. So we talk about terms like biomimicry, and that is a great tool to really, not that anything can't be done on this, but to mimic those forces that Mother Nature have evolved on the site. It's just, you fight less and you get out with a lot more benefits. We would, by incorporating prescribed grazing with the prescribed burning, you wouldn't be as frequently burning. When getting back to a more natural regime of every 4th year, maybe 5th year, you actually would have more diverse plants. It's so important to follow the forces that Mother Nature, look back historically, follow the forces that Mother Nature has utilized, and that's typically what we do with our conservation practices. And does this fit everyone? Probably not. Not everybody would have cattle, but I can see a future where we have people growing longleaf pine, which seems to be extremely disease resistant, extremely storm resistant compared to some of the more production oriented pines, and also it is a tremendous wood product, very competitive growth rates with loblolly, slash, and the other production pines on the right site. You know, it does. You can't really argue that one is better. Only if you argue looking strictly at wood products, but most people today understand that because markets fluctuate so much, it's dangerous to focus on just one market. So if you don't own cattle, but say you have a longleaf site, there are beginning to be producers that can rotate in their cattle. We're getting to technology where they put GPS collars on cattle, so you don't even have to have the infrastructure of fencing. You know, so they can contract. They can graze the site. It can benefit the producer. It can benefit all of the society with ecological benefits, and it can benefit the cattle producer.
My name is Brian Sean Early. I'm a botanist with the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. I've been with Wildlife and Fisheries for approximately 5 years now. Prior to that, I was in private consulting. I thoroughly enjoy my job here with the agency. It's probably one of the most rewarding, it is the most rewarding position I've ever had in my professional career. I started off wanting to do something outdoors, something with nature. So I picked a major called environmental science. Wanted to do toxicology type work. I went through 4 years of that and decided, you know, I really don't like chemistry. So I started looking for something else. I had a friend taking this course called dendrology. It sounded interesting. They're outside all the time. I dropped my second biochem, enrolled in dendrology, and changed my trajectory completely. Moved from environmental science into wildlife. And then as I began to start thinking about graduate school, I kind of incorporated some of my early roots with toxicology and switched directions. As I was noticing, there weren't many plant programs left in the state, and a lot of wildlife biologists were having trouble efficiently and thoroughly documenting wildlife habitat types and condition and quality. So I wanted to kind of switch gears again and focus more on wildlife habitat. So in grad school, I worked on remediation of oil well brine spill sites, involving a little bit of my toxicology or environmental science background, and then with some of the wildlife background that I've recently became accustomed to or became experienced with. So I studied plant communities, how they regenerate after these oil brine spills, and the macroinvertebrate fauna, how that regenerated after some oil brine spills in bottomland hardwood forests of Louisiana and southern Arkansas. So I think early on in my career, I was focused on doing something that would, yes, make a difference, something that was going to be exciting. I knew I didn't want to really be in an office every day. I wanted to be exposed to the outdoors in some aspect. But I was focused on a career and something that would be profitable. Really, I was thinking about, you know, how could I have a good lifestyle in the future? And really, I think, thinking back to that, I should have not focused on that at all. I should have sought after a problem that I saw. Instead of thinking about a career, find a problem that you want to solve and go for that. That is what's led me ultimately to this position and the most rewarding career opportunity I've had so far. So it took me a long time to get there. If you're young and upcoming or wrapping up your academic career, I would recommend seeking out a problem instead of a career and finding an avenue, an opportunity to solve that problem as far as making a difference and being happy with your job and things like that.
So my name is Matuzuki. I am a senior at LSU studying renewable natural resources with a concentration in wildlife ecology. I just got an internship with LDWF a couple of weeks ago as a new botany intern under Brian Sean Early. And it's been a wild ride. We've done quite a couple of plant surveys in different kinds of habitats across Louisiana, one in northern Louisiana and one Port Hudson and a historical site. So the purpose of this internship was to help him out with a little bit of his workload and also to enhance the things that I've learned in the classroom and give them a field application. And so one of the things that goes with that is I get my own project. The coastal prairie potholes, there's not a lot of data that's been taken on the species present. And so what we'll be doing is transects of I think 13 different sites of prairie potholes and just seeing what's there and trying to get quality assessment data.
Longleaf pine savannas are some of the most unique forest or plant community assemblages across North America, really. This system evolved in the Atlantic and and Gulf Coastal Plain, the outer Gulf Coastal Plain, which has never been glaciated. So there's been plants here for millennia. Longleaf pine ecosystems, or longleaf pine savanna, can be broken up into a variety of different sub-habitats or sub-communities, but almost all of them depend on fire, and these are all considered grassland communities. This area in the southeast has some of the highest lightning strike densities in North America, and the lightning strikes are what initiated the fire that this ecosystem or ecoregion depends on. The fuel for the fire comes from the grasslands itself, especially little blue stem, which is really high in lignin and provides ample fuel, as well as the longleaf pine needles that fall. They help promote fire, and carry fire across the landscape, and that fire reduces the woody cover in an area. That's why the canopy is largely open. That's why there's open understory, very little brush here, and very few woody species are actually fire tolerant. So the overstory is not that diverse, but the understory is extremely rich and very diverse. Another reason why this ecosystem or these types of habitats or plant communities are very important is because they're diminishing, and that's because of fire suppression. Fire has been suppressed for decades in this region, and without fire, this community can't survive. So one thing that we as land managers and conservation stewards are partaking in is reestablishing fire, bringing fire back to the landscape to bring life back to these natural communities that depend on them. As I said, the longleaf pine has evolved with fire. So it goes through several stages of growth. The first stage is considered the grass stage, or one of the earlier stages are considered the grass stage. And that is when the plant just emerges out of the soil and it produces long needles to provide fuel and encourage fire. And in that stage, it can sit in the grass stage for several years, maybe even up to 5 or 7 years in some cases, waiting for fire to come along. Once the fire hits, the growth becomes very rapid for a short period of time to get that plant up, get the buds of the tree up and out of the way of fire. So it can extend pretty quickly in height over the next couple of years right after a fire. So after fire comes through and triggers the growth of the longleaf pine, it moves from the grass stage up to a sapling stage. And in the early stages, or in the beginning of this sapling stage, you'll have a small trunk or stem, and it'll be coated with extremely long needles. Sometimes it looks like Cousin It or a punk rocker, as some people call it. And over the next couple of years, growth will be fairly rapid, and it'll start to branch out and get to 8 to 16 feet tall. Once the tree is reached, once the buds have gotten about 8 feet off the ground, it's really no longer susceptible to any fire damage, and the tree growth will start to slow down. And these trees can easily reach 100 to 200 years in age. It's one of the few old growth pines in the southeast. It's not a fast-growing pine like loblolly, Pinus taeta, or slash pine, Pinus echinata, or something like that. This is considered an old growth pine system. So these longleaf pine systems and other grassland systems throughout the southeast are, not only did they evolve with fire, but they also evolved with herbivores. Going back tens of thousands of years ago with giant herbivores like the mammoth or perhaps mastodon, and giant sloths and large ungulates, these systems were being grazed for extensive periods of time. In fact, they evolved under grazing as well as with fire. And over time, as those giant grazers have left the system, they were replaced by other grazers such as elk, bison, and species like that. And now, in today's time, that grazing activity is being supplemented or mimicked by the use of cattle on the landscape in many healthy longleaf pine savannas like you see here. One reason why they are so healthy is fire's been reintroduced and the grazing component has been reintroduced. The grazers come through, they turn up the soil a little bit with their hooves, they're depositing fecal material, which is nutrients, on the ground, and they're helping regenerate the system just like some of the larger grazers and the bison did years ago. So restoring the grazer to the landscape is integral to developing a healthy system along with fire. But it has to be done in the right way. The forage can't be grazed too low or else this will stop below ground productivity as well. Just like large herds did, they were constantly moving along. So the grazers here on this property that's managed so well, the cattle are constantly moved before the biomass drops below 50% on the surface. And since this property is managed and mimics the natural system of grazers moving across the landscape rather quickly or relatively quickly, it also saves money in land management for the cattle because there's less interaction for typical bovine parasites with the cattle. With natural systems like this, ranchers that tend to work with the system are more profitable than trying to manage for the cattle specifically, or any other single species really. When you look at a holistic management aspect, you can get a lot more out of the land and give a lot more back by managing it holistically for cattle, for wildlife, for timber, and for other environmental functions as well. This is Chinese tallow tree, also called chicken tree or money tree. I don't know why it's called money tree, except for maybe it takes money out of your pocket. But it was brought into the U.S. It's from Eastern Asia. It was brought into the U.S. In the early 1700s. That population moved around a little bit, but the big explosion came when specimens were brought from all over Eastern Asia for possible tallow or fuel, biodiesel source. And there were actually tallow farms set up across the southeast to try to extract this biodiesel or tallow from it. And from there, there's a lot of genetic mixing, and it's created a super plant in not a good way. It's one of the most invasives. It's probably within the top 3 or the top terrestrial invasive in the southeast. It can completely transform grasslands from an open, grassy savanna or prairie scenario into a forest thicket. Under ideal conditions, Chinese tallow can grow from seed. That seedling can grow, mature, drop seed, and that seedling, the second generation, can grow and drop seed within a single growing season. Cattle and other grazers generally or rarely ever go after this species, so it's not grazed, and one of the few ways to get rid of it really is with herbicide and constant repeated fire. As some of you are wrapping up your academic career, I would suggest to look for volunteer work and internships. Those are two things that really stand out when trying to make your way into a natural resource career. And we have opportunities available for students, like our intern, Chani. She'll work with us an entire summer. She'll get to learn a lot of aspects of what we do, enhance her field skills and reinforce her classroom material that she's learned. And she'll also get to exposure to developing her own project and setting up a research project and working with us. So it benefits the agency and it benefits the interns to develop these partnerships. And I encourage all of y'all to reach out to agencies and other nonprofits and other entities that might have some work that you're interested in